Welcome into another edition of Tide and Tiger, our pregame look at Alabama and Tennessee. Scott Griffin here with Tide and Tiger. Rodney, of course, with Tider Insider. And a lot of stuff to go on today. We're going to have tons of recruiting to talk about a little bit later as we get closer to that December signing period. These visits now with Alabama's fortuitous home schedule at the end of the year really helps out. We'll get into that. We'll also hear from Nick Saban, who's taking this game ultra seriously, as he should, and much, much more. And also this vaunted rivalry. Rodney, what's happening? You good?
I'm doing great. How are you, Scott?
I know you can verbally remember, because you have a photographic memory, all 100 games. Well, 99 games. This will be number 100. So go ahead. Start with number one.
Well, I tell you what, I remember a lot of them. There's no question about that, because it's been a great series.
No doubt about it. Here's how it stands. Okay, 54-37-8. Alabama won last year, 49-10. Alabama's won the last 10. Now, you remember before that, Phil Fulmer had Alabama's number, so it hasn't been the greatest rivalry lately.
Yeah, you know, one thing about the Alabama-Tennessee rivalry through the years and going way back, it's always been a streaky series. It seems like when one of the teams gets the upper hand, they keep it for a few years and sometimes a lot of years, and it kind of gets rolling. And, you know, fortunately right now we're in the middle of this Alabama run, which is a 10-year deal right now. And, you know, Scott, you just look back through the years, though, and you think about some of these games. There's been some tremendous games between these two programs. You know, you go back to 1973. That would be one of my earliest memories. Well, actually, the first one I watched was in 68, but I don't know exactly if I knew what I was watching. But I know in 73, when they played in Legion Field, if you remember, it was Alabama, which was a dominant team that year, was number one for a good part of the season, played Tennessee, which had Condredge Holloway, as you recall.
Oh, yeah, from
Bill
Huntsville.
Battle was Bill Battle, a Bryant protege, was the head coach at Tennessee. And on the first play of the game, I'll never forget, it was a nationally televised game, and Gary Rutledge hit Wayne Wheeler with an 80-yard touchdown. I think Alabama scored that covered 80 yards in 14 seconds, and Alabama was up 7-0. And Alabama actually extended their lead to 21-7, and you thought it might be a blowout, but Condredge Holloway, brought Tennessee back. It was a 21-21 game. And, one of the great things from that game, if you, and I'm sure you remember this, Coach Bryant, his big deal on punt returns was, I'm not really worried about how many yards you get. I just want you to catch the football. So he had gone out and recruited a player off the baseball team, the Alabama baseball team, to field punts. He was a safety punter, so to speak, make sure he catches the ball because he had great hands as an outfielder. Well, they stuck him in there with the game tied at 21. Robin Carey, he fields the punt, and lo and behold, takes it 50 yards for a touchdown to put Alabama up. And Alabama ends up winning that game 42-21. Another great game was 1979. Alabama, again, number one in the nation, was rolling along. Nobody expected Tennessee to come into Legion Field and challenge Alabama, but Tennessee jumped out to a 17-0 lead there early in the first half. And as you remember, Scott, back in those days, it was tough to overcome a 17-point lead, especially when you were a wishbone team, but Alabama came back and rolled and won 27-17. And then after you mentioned some of the Tennessee streaks, Johnny Majors, of course, his team at Tennessee beat Alabama in 82 to snap that 11-game streak. And Alabama lost for 4 years and didn't finally get back on the winning side until 1986 when Ray Perkins' team, Bobby Humphrey, ran for 217 yards, and Alabama demolished Tennessee 56-28 in Knoxville. 1990 is probably my favorite all-time game, not only in this series, Scott, but I would have to say it's probably my favorite all-time Alabama game, or it's certainly right there at the top, because this was a game that Tennessee had all those number one draft picks. They had 2 first-rounders at offensive tackle. They had 3 professional NFL wide receivers, Alvin Harper, Carl Pickens, and Anthony Morgan, tremendous players. Very talented defense. As you remember, Dale Carter was on that team, who went on to become the NFL Rookie of the Year with the Kansas City Chiefs at a later time. And they were just a prohibitive favorite over Alabama. There was almost no way. It was that Alabama could win that game, but went into Knoxville and won it 9-6, of course, on Philip Doyle's field goal there at the very end. But there's been some great games, as you mentioned. Certainly since Nick Saban came back in 2007, Alabama's been very dominant.
No doubt. But what Nick Saban would tell you is that 2 years ago, Tennessee held a 14-13 lead, 5:49 to go in the game, and Alabama had to win it 19-14. He would tell you that Terrence Mount Cody had to block not one but two kicks to beat Lane Kiffin's Tennessee team. That's the message he wants to get across, although the reality is the Tide has won 10 in a row.
Yeah, and that 2009 game you mentioned, what a game. Cody didn't block, as you mentioned, he did block the one at the end, but he also had the great block, as you remember, earlier in the game. Terrence Cody blocking 2 field goals in that game to really help Alabama win it. And then also, Scott, as you noted, in 2015, Jalen Hurd ran it into the end zone with 5:49 left. They kicked the extra point and really had Alabama on the ropes. But Jake Coker came through, leading Alabama down the field late. Derrick Henry finishing it off with a touchdown run to give Alabama the 19-14 win. And you really thought at that time, wow, next year in Knoxville, the 2016, it's going to be really, really tough. But as you noted earlier, Scott, Alabama went up there and won it 49-10 and just completely dominated the game.
Oh, over 400 yards rushing. We'll get into that in a moment because it could be that or close to that coming up on Saturday. I want to ask you these two. Tennessee's last win over Alabama, 16-13 win in 2006. The last time they won in Tuscaloosa was 2003, 51-43. You remember that? 5 overtimes.
I do remember.
5 overtimes.
I was standing on the field watching it.
Yeah. What's your memory of that? What jumps out at you?
Man, it just I think the thing that really would jump out at me, Scott, was when Alabama seemed to have the game won. Tennessee was backed up with a 4th and 19 and converted on 4th and 19 to stay alive and end up tying the game again, and it continuing on, and then Tennessee eventually winning the game. And there was also a point in that game where Tyrone Protho, late in regulation, returned a kickoff and was probably taking it to the house that would have, put Alabama up, made it very difficult for Tennessee, and a Tennessee player grabbed his face mask and, tackled him that way. It was a penalty, but it preserved a touchdown. And anyway, it was like you said, it was a 5 overtime game, and Alabama had plenty of opportunities but could never convert.
But obviously the players know this is a rivalry. They know about cigars. We've had Maserati Mac, as his Twitter handle is, Mac Wilson, already tweeting out, something about we're going to have cigars Saturday, getting ready for another win. I'm sure Nick Saban's really ecstatic with that development in the last 24 hours, but it's okay to be confident, and Alabama, again, has won 10 in a row. But it's interesting to hear the players' perspectives on it, and let's hear from Damian Harris and Sean Dion Hamilton on what they think about this rivalry.
We know that every team we play is going to give us their best effort. Whether we consider them a rivalry game or not, we know that every team we play is going to, they're going to give us their best shot. So games like this, we consider this a rivalry game, our game this weekend. So like I said, like every other team, we know they're going to give us their best game and then some, just because of the fact of it being considered a rivalry game. So we just got to have a good week of preparation, a good focused week, and get ready to play a good opponent.
It means a lot. I mean, I've been Alabama fan, for a while, and I can remember back to when Terrence Cody blocked that field goal at the end of the game. So it's a big rivalry for me.
All right, so Nick has reached those two. He may not have reached Mac Wilson. He tried to reach him in that tirade last Saturday on the kickoff penalty, you remember. But look, he knows how to prepare a team for these kind of games. Alabama has won 71 in a row against non-ranked opponents. Now, that sounds like a throwaway, dumb stat. But I would argue, Rodney, and I think you would agree, these games are more dangerous from the standpoint of getting your team ready to play. You get ready to play Clemson and Georgia and Auburn, but when a team's unranked, even in a rival game, it's hard to get your team motivated.
Yeah, it can be. It certainly can be. And the one thing about it, though, is we've discussed prior to this, Nick Saban is the best in the business at getting his team's attention. I don't think he lets them for 1 second rest on their laurels, so to speak, or get caught up in the accolades. Now, sometimes you have a difficult time doing that. But there's no question, as he even said last night, he's going to tell them, he harps on them over and over and over again about, getting yourself ready and playing to a standard. Alabama wants to play to a standard, not to the opponent, but to their own standard, regardless of who the opponent is. And, these guys, when they come into this program, from the very outset, that's something that is they're brainwashed, so to speak, in terms of, understanding that. And I think that's the one difference, with Alabama, where you see more of a consistency in performance, regardless of the opponent.
And I had a chance to talk to Nick Saban in his presser on Wednesday and ask him about his mastery of getting teams ready to play. Here's how it sounded.
Nick, you talked about it Monday and today, these kind of weeks are so dangerous. You've done well avoiding upsets, and I think it's because of training your guys psychologically. So how, in these kind of weeks, it's a lot more psychological than physical reps? I know physical reps are still important, but.
Well, physical reps are important because you need to go out there and do it right. If you don't have the right mindset and you don't have the right mental energy and intensity and focus, you can't get the right mental rep. All right, so that's when you create bad habits. All right, that's when you end up showing up at the game not ready to play. That's when they get in the game and you sort of had this arrogant attitude about how you prepared. Things don't go like you want them to go in the game, so you get frustrated, and then all of a sudden, top 10 teams get beat. That's how they get beat. And, I think everybody in our organization needs to understand that. But it's everybody's choice. You choose all this stuff. You choose your energy, you choose how you want to practice, you choose how you get ready to play, you choose how you respect the other team, you choose your mindset every day, you choose how you're going to play in practice, choose how you're going to get along with your teammates, choose all that. Everybody chooses it every day. Everybody in this room chooses it too. All right, so, and you know what? I can't make them choose it right. I can only tell them over and over and over and over until I can't talk anymore. And if they respond the right way, we'll be fine. If they don't, we could struggle.
I thought it was a great answer from him. I think that, one of the keys is, physically, you obviously got to be ready to play, but to physically execute, it all starts between the ears. And it starts with the way you're thinking. And that's where I think Nick Saban, again, as I said earlier, that's where he's the best in the business, in getting his guys ready to focus on the task at hand and the things that they have to do. And, again, look, we all know what this game is in terms of Alabama being a 34-point favorite and all of those types of things, but also understand, that the rivalry games do mean something. They are a little bit different. And I do agree with Nick Saban that you have to throw out the record books, that you can't focus on those types of things or get caught up in them. Because, again, I go back to 1990, and, Alabama was a 17.5-point underdog. People say, well, they're double that now as a favorite. But it really doesn't matter because it's a different time. And in that time, teams really didn't score it like they do now. Occasionally they would, but not often. So the point spreads were a little bit different. But the differences between the two teams then and now was about the same. Wasn't a whole lot of difference. Now, I do think Alabama was moving maybe forward in a positive direction back then, with Gene Stallings had just taken over. That program was just getting started. But at the same time, when you talk about the differences in talent, I mean, there was such a vast difference in talent in that game. There was no way anyone thought Alabama had a chance to win that game. And, it happened. Now, again, does that have anything to necessarily do with this game? No. The only point is that you never know. You keep a team in the game. They're not an untalented team. They certainly have some really good players. But if you keep them in the game, you never know what could happen. So I think that's the thing that Nick Saban's trying to tell his team is, hey, let's go out there, let's have the intensity, let's have focus, and, let's put this game away early. Let's jump on them. Let's not, come out there and muddle around.
Tide and Tiger podcast, Scott Griffin, Tide and Tiger, Rodney Orr, of course, TiderInsider.com, breaking down Tennessee, Alabama. Don't forget, in just a couple of minutes, we'll talk about recruiting and the talent that's going to be on the field and looking at the field, literally thinking about casting their lot with Alabama in the future. We'll get to that in just a second. Let's break the game down. Tennessee's horrible, okay? They're horrible against stopping the run. Let's just be honest. They're really great at stopping the pass, but they're horrible at stopping the run. Rodney, there's like 10 to 15 teams worse than them, and that's it. Here's what I don't understand. And look, we saw South Carolina and Georgia Tech run all over. UMass ran all over them in the running game. But here's what I'm going to throw out at you that has me scratching my head. Tennessee is 19th in the country in 3-and-outs defensively. They have 28 3-and-outs in 79 drives. I don't understand that because they can't stop the run.
Yeah, that is amazing. That's an amazing stat. I'd have to look at all those statistics and kind of compare them to some other teams and see how often do they get to third down without giving up a first down. That might be part of it. But, Scott, first of all, look at Alabama. Run the football, stop the run, be plus in turnovers, and your chances of winning are dramatically higher than the opponent. Alabama right now averaging 302 yards a game rushing, only giving up a mere 66 on the ground. I think that's number one in the country. All right, plus 11 in turnovers. That's an amazing statistic, plus 11 in turnovers. So now we know, basically the recipe to Alabama being 7-0 right now. Not only do they have great talent, superior talent, but they also running the football, stopping the run, and doing an incredible job in terms of the turnover margin. Now, with that said, as you look at this game, Tennessee is giving up 242 yards a game on the ground. So why do you really throw the ball against a defense that gives up 242 a game? I mean, so therein lies my point that maybe that's part of the reason they're better against the pass is because nobody really has had to throw it much on them. They're giving up nearly 24 points a game defensively. They're only scoring 21 points a game. So this is a Tennessee team, as you said, Scott. I mean, it's really struggling on both sides of the ball. It's struggling internally with Coach Butch Jones. He's embattled. There's some people that even question whether or not he'll finish or make it through the season. So, this is a team that comes in here against the number one team in the country that's averaging 42 points a game, only giving up 10. This Tennessee team certainly has their backs to the wall. And with that said, at the same time, what do they have to lose? They can come in and play really loose.
And that's what Nick Saban talked about earlier this week. Alabama, as you said, 302.6 yards a game running. That's seventh overall nationally, first in the SEC. 484.9 is the total offensive numbers, first in the SEC, 15th nationally, and then 10th in scoring nationally, 42.7, and that's first in the SEC as well. So I don't think there's any secret what we're going to see is what you're telling me, right? I mean, Damian Harris, Bo Scarborough, Najee Harris, probably Brian Robinson, maybe Ronnie Clark.
Josh
I mean, we're going to see, we're going to see the whole litany list, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what you do. You come out and you do what you do. And in Alabama, it's running the football first and then, throwing it after that. And, those types of things, stop the run defensively, which, Tennessee's only averaging, I think, 134 a game. But they do have an outstanding back now. John Kelly is a really fantastic back. He leads the SEC in all-purpose yardage. And this is on a not very good team, as we've said over and over. And so, but that guy is really, really good. Not only is he good, Scott, but you see a lot of effort from him. You see a lot of passion from him in spite of their circumstances. And I think that's one thing that makes him really impressive. Now, again, when we're talking about the Tennessee offense, we know that Quentin Dormady started the season. He's really struggled at quarterback for them. They've replaced him with redshirt freshman Jarrett Warrantano, who was a highly recruited player, more of a dual threat type quarterback. He started his first game last week against South Carolina, had Tennessee at the goal line threatening to win the game at the end, but they couldn't convert. So he's going to have a really tough chore, though, coming in here to Tuscaloosa in his second start, facing not only this defense, but the crowd that he's going to experience is going to be something really different for him.
Well, he's playing because he can run the football. In fact, let's hear from Bob Kesling, the Tennessee Vols play-by-play voice on Guarantano, and also the fact that Tennessee, they can't stop anybody from running the football.
I guess the game that was most disturbing was the fact that UMass was able to run the ball against them. And UMass, the last poll I've seen, has been ranked as one of the worst 10 teams in college football. And yet, they played Tennessee a close game, 17-14. So there have been a lot of alarms that have gone off. I think all the yards that Georgia Tech did roll up against Tennessee, and this is nothing new. I mean, this was going on last year. Missouri put up huge numbers against Tennessee, and Vanderbilt put up huge numbers. So they defensively they've really struggled the last year and a half, really slowing down anybody, and especially slowing down good teams. And that's no secret. You just look at the stats, and that'll tell you. And a lot of it has to do with injuries. When Tennessee lost the two top linebackers early in the season, Darren Kirkland Jr. and Cortez McDowell, that shifted everything. And they've just not gotten very good linebacker play consistently, and they have no depth in the defensive line. I mean, against Georgia Tech, Khalil McKenzie played 80 plays at defensive tackle. I mean, have you ever heard of that?
No.
A defensive tackle playing 80 plays in a game? Yeah, 80. And I think the Kendall Vickers, the other defensive tackle, I think he played 70 some snaps. So that just tells you that they're only playing 2 or 3 defensive tackles and 2 or 3 defensive ends. A, because that's all they got, and B, that they just don't trust some of the young guys to get in there yet. But so in the fourth quarter, the Tennessee defensive line is pretty much worn out. So you're just hoping that the offense can come up with enough points. So there are a lot of, and they've had injuries in the secondary, and everybody has injuries, so that's no excuse. I mean, Alabama's had injuries, but yet you were able just to fill in guys and keep on going. But Tennessee has not been able to recover too much. Offensively, they lost Juwan Jennings in the first game of that Georgia Tech game. Mm-hmm. And that's really hurt offensively because he was the big wide receiver they were expecting. And Marquez Callaway had a really good game against Georgia Tech. In fact, his couple of touchdowns really helped win the game. But now defenses are taking him away because Tennessee has nobody on the other side that scares you. So there are a lot of problems on both sides of the ball right now.
As you said, John Kelly is one of only 2 players in the country. The other one is Saquon Barkley, of course, of Penn State, a Heisman Trophy, probably the lead candidate for that leads their team in rushing and receptions. But do they have anything else to be concerned with, in your opinion, besides John Kelly?
Well, I think when you look at it, Scott, yeah, I mean it's Kelly. I mean that's it. Of course they do have some other players, but their injury. They have a couple of injuries at wide receiver. Juwan Jennings is out, and he's one of their better receivers, if not their best receiver. You got the young quarterback. You've got some youth on the offensive line. That's certainly not been a real strength for them thus far. So I think, again, their execution is going to be something that I'm going to be interested in watching to see if Warren Tano and some of their younger players, just how they respond, going up against this Alabama defense. Will they be intimidated? How will they respond very early in the game? I think that for any hope that Tennessee has to even kind of keep this thing respectable, those guys are going to have to step up, Scott, and really show that, hey, at least lay it on the line, play without being intimidated.
Well, look, they've got other weapons. They got Trey Smith, as you know. Alabama tried to get him, maybe the best freshman offensive lineman in the country. Ethan Wolf is a terrific tight end. He looks like Jason Witten out there to me. He played at Tennessee, but he's just not getting the ball. Marquez Callaway is averaging 19.58 yards a catch. You just don't have enough of them. So it really comes down to quarterback play, doesn't it?
It's nothing consistent.
Right.
They've had very little consistency, and that's one reason why, again, they make the switch to Warrantano at quarterback. And you mentioned Wolf. He was a guy that Alabama actually recruited as well, and he is an outstanding tight end. But again, it's distributing the ball, getting the ball, executing, and all of those things. But it does go back to the point that Nick Saban made earlier, which this is a team that has talent. I mean, it's not like they're barren or anything. But again, they just have not been consistently executing.
You want to guess how many catches Mr. Wolf has?
I have no idea how many Ethan Wolf has.
He's got 10.
10. Wow.
Yeah, he needs to have double that by now for Tennessee. Of course, they have his brother, Eli Wolf, as well. But Ethan Wolf, 10. Now, last year he only caught 21, so I guess he's doing what they expect. 77 career catches. He should have 50 this year if you're getting him the ball right.
Well, speaking of that, flipping to the other side, Alabama, you talk about their passing game. I think Ridley has, 33, if I'm not mistaken.
And the next
that's off
is
the top
9.
of my head.
The next is 9. That's right.
The next is 9 as far as a wide receiver goes, and that's Jerry Jeudy.
Right.
So they're not exactly distributing the ball to a lot of different guys. Now, I know Bo Scarborough is technically he's second on the list in receptions. What do you have, 11, 12, something like that? So the point is, though, Alabama's not getting the ball out to their wide receivers in terms of, spreading it around much. Now, Henry Ruggs does have 4 catches, and all 4 of them are for touchdowns. So it's difficult to argue that he certainly hasn't been productive. And, hey, you remember the one, was it against Ole Miss when Hurts flushed left and hit him with a perfect strike, and he dropped that? He would be 5 for 5. What an incredible statistic that would be. Hell, Hinches, I think he's got, 2 grabs, both for touchdowns as well?
That's right.
So we're not seeing as much of the tight ends as we thought at this point in terms of as receivers. That'll be another interesting development to see how Alabama offensively, as they're throwing the football, the things that Brian Dable does and wants to do, the versatility, the diversity of it, spreading the ball around. That's going to be interesting to see how Alabama grows in that area as we move along. We saw Josh Jacobs catch a couple of balls against Ole Miss. Had a touchdown reception. So that's going to be something that I think is going to be interesting to watch in this game to see if Alabama does, in terms of the passing game, spread it around a little bit more.
10 catches total all year for the tight ends, 31 total for all the other wide receivers that play on a consistent basis, not named Calvin Ridley. That's not enough. You're right. So I think to your point, that has to improve. Jerry Jeudy, Scarborough does have 11. Jeudy is next with 9. That's it, 9. So that definitely has to improve. Before we get to recruiting, give me a quick, what are you looking for in this game? Nick Saban would hate us. I don't think victory is in doubt. But, it's about playing to a standard and to that bar. What are you looking for?
Scott, I think the focus that Nick Saban's trying to get across to his team is, as always, we're not looking at the opponent. It's a faceless opponent. We want to play to a standard. That's a standard that we've established here at Alabama. So as they approach this game, even though, they hear all the talk, the 34-point favorite, all of that conversation, again, I think the focus is stay focused on playing to a standard. And that's really, I think, the approach and something that Nick Saban's trying to drive home this week.
All right. A big recruiting weekend coming up, as they all are here with the December signing period. You're the sage. You're the guru. You look in your ball, your crystal ball. Tell us what's happening with recruits coming and in the near future. But this is a huge game. CBS, Tennessee, during the day, beautiful weather. This is going to be big for Bama.
Yeah, it is, Scott. The December signing period coming up here not too long away, and certainly Alabama has some games here, this game this weekend, and in a couple of weeks LSU. So those are going to be big visit weekends. And Bobby Brown is a defensive lineman from the state of Texas at Arlington Lamar High School that has been one of the top defensive line targets in the high school ranks for Alabama. He's supposed to be in on an official visit this weekend. And he is going to make a decision on November the 2nd. But here's the catch. Alabama's kind of seemed to be the team to beat, but now Texas A&M's making a late run. They've gotten him to agree to a visit next weekend, and the Aggies think they've got a good shot to sway him before he announces on November the 2nd. I think right now the key for Alabama is getting him here this weekend and hopefully possibly convincing him that this is where he wants to be and maybe canceling that Texas A&M visit. So we'll see what happens with Bobby Brown. Another Texan that's going to visit this weekend is Yoakum wide receiver Joshua Moore. He's a current commit to Nebraska, really talented receiver. He's a guy that I think Alabama, when you look at their receiver core in terms of the commitment, Slade Bolden is committed. He is out of Monroe, Louisiana. He's a slot receiver. Xavier Williams out of down in Florida, South Florida area. He's a guy that's committed as a wide receiver. I think Alabama clearly has Jalen Waddle very high on their board, maybe the top guy. He's a tremendous prospect out of Bel Air, Texas. That's in the Houston area. Scott, I think this guy may be the most dynamic receiver in the country with that ball in his hands. He can do a little bit of stuff like Palmer has a little bit of Amari Cooper in him.
Wow.
So he's an outstanding player. Yeah, he's a real dynamite. And also Justin Ross from here at Phoenix City Central, maybe the number one player in the state. He's certainly very high on the board. Jacob Copeland's a current commitment to Florida. He's from Pensacola Pine Forest. I think he's a little uneasy about maybe what's going on at Florida. He's made a couple of recent visits to Alabama. There's some talk that maybe Florida, Jim McElwain is, that spot there that he's in might not be the most comfortable position right now. So let's keep an eye on that. I think, again, Copeland's an outstanding prospect who could also play in the secondary. So those are some of the guys that are visiting. Some other guys will make some visits as well, a lot of these unofficial visits. Alabama fans are asking about, what about the quarterback spot? Well, Emory Jones out of Franklin Heard County is one of the guys that's been high on Alabama's board for quite some time. He's committed to Ohio State. He's been invited back to Alabama this weekend for a visit. He was here a few weeks ago. Alabama's supposed to watch him play tomorrow night. I know that Urban Meyer's scheduled to be there as well and watch him. So we'll see how that develops. Keep an eye on Emory Jones. The other quarterback, along with Jones, that I think is worth keeping an eye on is Jaron Williams out of Lawrenceville, Georgia, committed to Kentucky. He's a guy that's been on Alabama's board for quite some time, very highly. So those are the two guys I would watch at that position. On the offensive line, Emil Ekiyor made an official visit to Alabama a few weeks back. He's out of Indianapolis Cathedral High School, been committed to Michigan for quite some time. I think he might be the number one center in the country, certainly a guy that ranks very highly. And I would keep an eye on him. I think his visit to Alabama went extremely well. I think he's given strong consideration to flipping. Panay Sewell is the number one player in the state of Utah. He's an outstanding lineman, could play guard, could play tackle, got tremendous size, 6'5", 350, and has great feet, Scott, for a guy his size. I'd keep an eye on him. They were trying to work it out to get him here this weekend. I'm not sure if that's been solidified yet or not, but I know they wanted to get him in here this weekend, Scott, if at all possible. We talked about the wide receivers, the tight ends. Dominic Wood Anderson's a guy from Arizona Western Community College who's been very, very high on Alabama's list, Scott. There's been some comparisons to O.J. Howard with this guy. He was once thought to be leaning strongly to Alabama, pulled a surprise commitment back late in the summer to Texas, but he has continued to maintain a lot of contact with Alabama. I know that Tosh LaPoy was out there visiting him a few weeks ago. I think he's still definitely in the mix, so keep an eye on him, the junior college tight end. Also, Glenn Beal out of River Ridge, John Curtis, which is in the New Orleans area, committed to LSU, 6'5", 250. He's another guy that I would keep an eye on at the tight end spot. Luke Ford out of Cartersville, Illinois, is a guy that Alabama's kind of flirted with a little bit. He came to Alabama's camp and visited and so forth, but not really sure exactly what Luke Ford's going to do, but he's still somewhat in the mix as well. At the running back spot, it's really interesting. A lot of guys that Alabama's in the mix with. I think a couple that I would keep an eye on, because I think when you look at the current group of Alabama running backs, the young running backs, Najee Harris, Brian Robbins, couple of really strong, big physical guys that, obviously can do a lot of different things. I think they want to get or might want to focus on a couple of explosive guys, get at least one of those explosive guys in the mix. I would think that Asa Martin out of Decatur, Austin, who visited last weekend. Although he's committed to Auburn, keep an eye on him. And also Jerome Ford out of Armwood, Seffner, Florida. He's another guy that fits that mold of being a really explosive type player from the running back spot, very versatile. So I would keep an eye on both of those guys. On the defensive side, we mentioned Bobby Brown on the defensive line. Obviously, defensive line is a very, very high priority for Alabama in this recruiting class. I know that some fans are worried about it. Quickly, they have Stephon Wynn committed out of IMG Academy. I think he's probably another Dalvin Tomlinson-type player. Jerez Parks, who committed last year, as you remember, but took the gray shirt. He enters school in January, Scott. He's projected as about a 270-pound defensive end, so he would be a guy that you would probably project at that on the line for this class. And then also Jordan Davis, who's committed out of Memphis Southwind. He's another guy like Parks that will be projected as a 270-plus pound defensive end. From there, I think, obviously Alabama's in on several guys. We mentioned Brown. Tariq Smith visited. He's out of Cleveland Heights, Ohio, visited last week on an official visit. I know a lot of people think, well, here's a guy that's right in Ohio State's backyard. But the fact is, he's not a native of Ohio. He moved into the state recently. His mother came down here on the visit with him last week. They had a great time. I would keep an eye on him. Alabama, Penn State, Ohio State, among those that are in the mix. USC also in there. Among some of the other defensive linemen, Teron Vincent, a name that's really popped up recently in terms of a guy interested in visiting Alabama. Scotty's a very high-profile defensive lineman out of IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, committed to Ohio State somewhat early, but Alabama's kind of getting in that mix with him pretty strong right now. He's supposed to make a visit here pretty soon. Not sure if he's going to be able to make it in this weekend. Again, I haven't been able to get confirmation on that visit, but we'll see if he can make it this weekend. But I know Alabama's really pushing hard for that. Yabi Anoma is a really interesting name out of Baltimore, St. Francis. ESPN's had him as high as, I think, the number 2 prospect in the nation. Scotty's about a 6'5", 235-pound pass rusher deluxe. I mean, this guy might be the best pure pass rusher in the country. I think Alabama's in great shape with him right now. Supposed to visit officially on November the 4th. Maryland and Michigan are also in the mix. But again, I think Alabama's in good position with him. J.J. Peterson, linebacker out of Colquitt County in Moultrie, Georgia. He plays for Russ Probst, as you remember. And, Russ Probst and Jeremy Pruitt, the Alabama defensive coordinator, were together at Hoover for a while, so they have a great relationship. I think Alabama's in tremendous position with J.J. Peterson. Also in the secondary, which is another high priority for Alabama in this recruiting class, they have a commitment from Jalen Armour-Davis, a very versatile player out of Mobile, St. Paul's. Could play corner, could play safety, possibly could play the star position. And then I think they're in great position with Savion Smith, who is a former 5-star recruit out of the state of Florida who had signed with LSU a couple of years ago with Les Miles. I don't think he was too enchanted with the new coach Orgeron there at LSU, and he bolted back in the summer, Scott, now at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. I'd keep an eye on him. I think he ends up at Alabama as a corner. And also Nadab Joseph out of Hialeah, Florida, also formerly a commitment to LSU. He is going to make his decision fairly soon, probably before the December signing period. And I think Alabama's the team to beat there. Now, Alabama's still in on probably the top 2 corners in the country. They both play at the same high school, American Heritage down in Plantation, Florida. Tyson Campbell, Patrick Surtain, both those 2 guys are elite players, elite cornerback prospects. Tyson Campbell is a guy being heavily pursued by numerous schools, including Georgia and Miami. But I think Alabama's also very strongly in the mix there. Surtain is a guy that some people think is the number 1 corner in the country. LSU's been the odds-on favorite, but Alabama in the mix there. Josh Jobe, formerly out of Miami Columbus, committed to Miami. He's now at Cheshire Academy up in Connecticut. He's an outstanding corner that Alabama's in the mix with. And also Kelvin Joseph, a versatile player out of Baton Rouge, who was committed to LSU. He kind of decommitted a couple of weeks ago. Alabama's been in the mix with him. Long story short, Scott, I think that Alabama's going to do extremely well. I think they're going to finish very strong in recruiting and fill their needs.
No doubt about it. And Tennessee this weekend, big weekend, and LSU after an off weekend. then Mercer won't be so big. They might entertain some guys, but really it's Tennessee, LSU. We got 2 more weekends here for recruits because Alabama plays Auburn at Auburn. So 2 big weekends left to impress recruits. And then, of course, the final work begins for every college team getting ready for December. Great stuff from Rodney Orr, Tider Insider, as always. Scott Griffin, Tide and Tiger. We appreciate you listening. We'll have more coming up here on the Tide and Tiger Podbean channel. Don't forget about Tide and Tiger on the YouTube channel, where we have all the videos from Alabama and Auburn there. And, of course, TiderInsider.com. $48 a year gets you on all the message forums, all this kind of recruiting information, videos, podcasts, and more. For Rodney Orr, this is Scott Griffin saying so long. We'll talk to you in a few days right here on Tide and Tiger.